C.S. Lewis famously said, "Friendship is born at that moment when one person says to another, 'What, you too? I thought I was the only one.'" I've been wondering lately if there could be a scientific or empirical definition of friendship, a way to truly measure or classify it. On the one hand, like Lewis suggests, there are usually qualifiers or markers of a friendship, such as people who share similar joys or interests. But I also don't think it can be reduced to some kind of formula, like a formula that would say, like, we have X number of things in common, which equates to a friendship that has Y percentage strength. There's something more elusive going on in friendship, something not as tangible that somehow enables some people to just click, to get each other, to be encouraged or livened in each other's presence. I'm unsure social science or psychology has the ability to tease out what that something is. But in addition to the obvious and the mysterious elements that help a friendship come to life, there's a third and maybe overlooked piece to the puzzle. I believe this piece is simply the desire or the perspective we bring to the table. And what I mean by that is this. In addition to the objective things that help a friendship click, things like shared interests and beliefs, there exists a more subjective side to the success of friendships. By subjective, I mean to say that we can choose how to look at a person. And in this choice, in the way that we perceive another, lies an enormous power. I'm saying you really can be friends with almost anyone if you can learn to focus on elements of your shared humanity. I'm not saying best friends, but I'd argue friends. I would even be so bold as to say that what obstructs us from achieving this human-to-human bond, this friendship with any person we meet, is less the differences between us and more how we view or interpret or react to those differences. A great example of how important our perspective is and how we relate to others comes from the Gottman's work on marital conflicts. They argue that marital conflicts can be divided into two categories: solvable problems or perpetual problems. As their names imply, solvable problems can be resolved and put behind you, but perpetual problems persist. Now, what is great about their research and counsel is this. While we often think that perpetual problems spell disaster or ruin for a couple, they argue that there's no need for this to be the case. In fact, they say perpetual problems are unavoidable. Putting two humans together in tight quarters guarantees there will be ongoing points of contention. The key is how you choose to view, interpret, and react to those differences. Here is them reflecting on the foolishness of trying to get around this issue. These couples intuitively understand that some difficulties are inevitable, much the way chronic physical ailments are unavoidable as you get older. They are like a trick knee, a bad back, an irritable bowel, or a tennis elbow. We may not enjoy having these problems, but we are able to cope by avoiding situations that worsen them, and by developing strategies and routines to help ease them. Psychologist Dan Weil said it best in his book, After the Honeymoon. When choosing a long-term partner, you will inevitably be choosing a particular set of unsolvable problems that you'll be grappling with for the next 10, 20, or 50 years. Marriages are successful to the degree that the problems you choose are the ones you can cope with. Weil writes, Paul married Alice, and Alice gets loud at parties, and Paul, who is shy, hates that. But if Paul had married Susan, he and Susan would have gotten into a fight before they even got to the party. That is because Paul is always late, and Susan hates to be kept waiting. She would feel taken for granted, which she is very sensitive about. Paul would see her complaining about this as her attempt to dominate him, which he's very sensitive about. If Paul had married Gail, they wouldn't have even gone to the party because they would still be upset about an argument they had the day before about Paul's not helping with the housework. To Gail, when Paul does not help, she feels abandoned, which she is sensitive about. And to Paul, Gail's complaining is an attempt at domination, which he is sensitive about. And so it goes. So if these areas of contention exist within our most selective, discriminatory relationship, the spouse we elected for a lifetime, how much more will we encounter near infinite areas of divergence with anyone else we interact with? Conflict due to our innate and chosen differences is inevitable. But as many wise people have discovered, we all have the power, or maybe we should use the word privilege, to interpret what these conflicts mean psychologically and socially. We can magnify them and wield them against people, use them as rationales for distancing ourselves, or we can contextualize them, interpret them with generosity, and decide to focus more on areas of commonality. We always have a choice. I argued that in the last video, and I'm sticking to that argument. We have some agency. The question is not if we will exercise it, but how we will exercise it. An old theologian once said, "Love is contrary to a censorious spirit." Censorious is probably an archaism, but you can hear or see the word censor in there, this idea of censorship, of always putting yourself in the judge's seat. He was saying to approach another with love is to view someone with generosity, the opposite of which is the censorious spirit, a kind of hunger to dismantle, disregard, or exclude someone because you're always looking for faults in them. This doesn't mean you turn a blind eye to another's faults. Rather, what this means is you make the very intentional decision to love or befriend that person despite those faults. You don't let those faults define the relationship. You do the mature thing where you say to yourself, I'm a person with numerous faults and perpetual weaknesses, and I still want others to pursue me with generosity. So I should approach others with a similar willingness to engage with kindness amidst the messiness. This is called the golden rule, right? Do to others what you'd have them do to you. If that sounds too religious, that's fine. You can come at the same idea from a more political or philosophical angle and recognize the wisdom and the principle of tolerance. We cover this in the second step in David French's book, Divided We Fall. Tolerance requires we make space. We put up with or don't exclude people with whom we disagree. Tolerance, I feel, is a very weak form of the non-censorious love we just talked about, but it falls under the same umbrella. It is a kind of subspecies of this love in that it still requires we exhibit some form of charitable posture to another. The key is we do have the power to view others, especially those we are socially conditioned to stereotype, with a more charitable interpretation. We just have to exercise that power. I've argued that becoming news sober will help us in this endeavor, as it will lessen our exposure to the onslaught of stereotypes and caricatures of the other side. The next step, though, is to make sure you have some friendships that cut across the aisle. This can be hard because we increasingly live in more geographically segregated bubbles. We've already cited the statistic that the number of people living in landslide counties rose from 38% to 60% between 1992 and 2016. But let's be honest, statistics almost never move us. What moves us is stories, especially the stories we inhabit. So I'll share a bit of mine to hopefully stimulate you to reflect on yours. I live in West Michigan, amidst some very red counties that always vote Republican. Our hometown of Holland is known for having a church on every corner, and there are some corners that have multiple churches, no joke. So one would think that being surrounded by political conservatives, that my interactions would just naturally reflect the demographical realities of my geography. But interestingly, this is not the case. I started a nonprofit urban organic farm, and with the exception of some homeschool families, the CSA membership was a relatively homogenous group of educated, liberal-leaning types. So many of my friendships were birthed in this farming project, and to this day, my tribe has a large number of progressive folks. I remember the time we had 3 Priuses in our driveway when our book club was meeting at our house. We had to laugh, and we did get into conversation that evening about who had friends of a different political persuasion. And I remember being floored when someone in the group shared that they couldn't think of any friends who voted Republican. And I think what really floored me was not just that a person might exist in this kind of bubble, but that this particular friend might be experiencing this, because this is literally the nicest guy in the world. Someone I know who would be nothing but generous in his interpretation and dealings with someone across the aisle. He's not someone who really talks about politics. He's just a very humble, soft-spoken, thoughtful person. So the fact that he wasn't in such a cross-cutting friendship struck me as kind of tragic. And this has got to be a big part of our problem, what has been dubbed the big sort, that we as a society and as individuals are no longer in close proximity and in friendships with people on the other side of the aisle. Republicans, I would say, need to meet this friend. If you're a conservative out there watching this, please note there are people out there like my friend with incredible integrity and servant hearts who vote Democratic. And in the same breath, it's every bit as important for any Democrats listening to this to know that many Republicans out there are the kindest people you can imagine. I say this from firsthand experience, from close encounters with the other kind. I have a good number of friends who are Republicans. I know someone who voted for Trump and has a handgun. For the record, I did not vote for Trump, nor did I vote for Harris, but that's really an aside. What is relevant is that I know how just the thought of a Trump supporter who owns a gun creates an allergic reaction for many progressives. But these caricatures, that's what they are. And they've been fed to us, and they're almost always gross exaggerations or ridiculous reductions of real people. People that beyond the partisan signals are fundamentally mirrors of our own human hearts. The person I know who owns a handgun and voted for Trump also happens to be one of the kindest men I know. The kind of guy who just wants to help people, the kind of guy who will literally give you the shirt off his back. I bought a rifle this last year because after 8 years of the deer demolishing my garden, my committed pacifism, I was exhausted. And since it's illegal to own a cougar, I came to see that I need to be the missing apex predator. So I went to this friend's property to shoot on his range and pick his brain, because I know he used to hunt a little bit, but he doesn't really anymore. And I learned that because he said he just doesn't like shooting animals, doesn't like killing things. Again, if you knew him, you'd be like, of course, because you're a gentle teddy bear at heart. I've got much more of a bloodthirst in my veins than he does. But I say all this just to illustrate that demonizing people on the other side is ultimately foolishness. It's just dishonest. Dishonest to the makeup of the human heart. We really are more alike than we believe. But if we fail to have relationships across the aisle, it's so much easier to maintain our fictions. The fictions that the news stations and your political party talking heads propagate. The fictions that our worst psychological instincts will latch onto. But if you are friends with someone on the other side of the aisle, you will have a reality check to deal with. It won't be as easy to paint with broad strokes. I don't believe any one of these 5 steps taken by itself will heal our partisan hearts. Our situation is too entrenched and complicated. But I really believe that if one takes all 5 steps together and seriously, there is a pathway out of our predicament. Because even this step of befriending someone of the opposite political party is really a stepping stone to reach a whole new level of freedom. I think people can and should strive to reach a place of liberation from political identity. Please hear me out. I'm not saying we should move beyond being politically involved or that we should stop caring about issues. What I'm saying is that the ability to see other people's humanity, to care for one another in healthy and sane ways, is not just undermined, but the very antithesis of current political party agendas. Each political party is telling us the same thing, that half the population is good and half is evil. They just disagree about which half is which. So why play their game? The rational thing to do is to disassociate with these partisan identities, these warring tribes, to realize that you and I have the agency, the power to interpret people differently. We always have a choice. I'm sticking to that argument. We have some agency. The question is not if we will exercise it, but how we will exercise it. Being the aisle is about being free to not only recognize the strengths and weaknesses of both sides, but freeing yourself to befriend people on both sides. Thank you for your time. Again, God bless.